Oh my gosh, we are live. I am so excited to be joined today by Isaiah Bollinger. Isaiah is a goat. Oh my gosh, in e-commerce. I'm so honored to have him on the show. He's the founder and CEO of Trellis, a leading e-commerce agency based out of Massachusetts. And Isaiah also is an advisor for many other e-commerce companies as well. And Isaiah, welcome to the show. It's so amazing to have you on today. I can't
Yeah,
wait to
thank
talk
you
to
so
you.
much. You're too kind with the goat acronym. I was joking before when we were off the podcast where it doesn't always feel like that way when you're trying to get people to adopt some of the things that we're doing or talking to companies about what they should do. And if that was the case, I think we'd be getting a lot more people listening to us.
Oh my gosh, isn't that so true? It feels like sometimes like it's the Berlin Wall just trying to get people to understand
Yeah,
and break down those barriers, especially in B2B e-commerce. And
yeah.
this topic today, we're going to be talking all about sales adoption, which is such a critical component of a successful B2B e-commerce transformation. And I'm like biting at the bit to talk to you about this. I have like full of questions. We might have to have a part two. But before we dive into that, I was so intrigued by your history and how you ended up founding Trellis. And I thought it was so interesting that, you actually worked for the Democratic National Committee back in 2008 when President Obama was running for president. What a cool and
It was
amazing
very different,
election.
I feel like, than now.
Yeah.
It was definitely a cool time, although I wouldn't say it was the most fun job at all times. It was kind of like, to be honest, you're in college. I was maybe only like 19, and it's kind of like, what's going to pay me money, and where can I get a job quickly? And that just turned out to be they had a local office in my hometown over summer, and so my friend I think was working there, and he got me a job. I think the requirements were pretty low because ultimately you were just helping them raise money, and if you could prove that you could help them, I think honestly it was probably my first. I would actually call it my first like sales job because
Uh-huh.
ultimately you were helping raise money, and which is like much harder than selling something because we were essentially selling hope, or if you remember the Obama, we were not actually selling anything. We are
The
asking for money.
material
Yeah,
essence, right?
that if you donate to this campaign, then hopefully you'll get some value in the future. But there's no actually product or service that we're just pretty much asking for money for the
But
for
don't you
the
feel sometimes like as a service business, that's what we're selling? Like sometimes as a marketer selling marketing services, I feel like that's what I'm selling these customers a lot of the
It
time. It's
can take, I
so
think for
frustrating.
us, I mean, I try and make sure that everything we deliver is fairly tangible, but the
Yeah.
problem is that I think it's just more so that it can take a lot longer than people
Yes.
expect. And the
Yes.
value of it is like everyone's looking for these like 2 month ROI, like there's just very little things in sales and marketing and e-commerce that can get you a fast ROI unless it's like, okay, we're going to improve the existing ad spend campaign that we
Yep.
already have. But that
Exactly.
like, unless it's something that's already kind of working and you want to make it better, most things are going to take probably 3 to 6 months or 6 months plus to see any sort of ROI, especially in
Absolutely.
B2B e-commerce, which is just, and
Yeah.
unfortunately most companies lack the patience to make these investments. And then they're all, then they kind of end up constantly chasing these short-term things that don't work.
Exactly. I mean, it's so interesting. It's like anything in life. It's like going to the gym, If you wanna,
Yeah.
like, get a six pack or change your physique, it's
Yeah.
not
You're like,
gonna happen in 2 weeks. You have to
exactly. Yeah.
consistently show up
Yeah, I
every
think the most
single,
sustainable way to lose weight, and it's not like exact for everyone, is like you're supposed to lose like 1 pound a week.
Yeah.
So it's like roughly, and so if you think about it, it's like, oh, if you want to lose 50 pounds, that's a year. But like, you could try and diet and lose it in like 3 months, but when you do those like fast plans, they usually backfire and you can't sustain.
Yeah.
You don't
And then you
sustain
gain
the,
gain it
yeah, you
back.
gain it back. Yeah, exactly. So
So true. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Did you ever meet President Obama? I'm so curious. Did you meet
no,
him?
we were so far removed from that.
Oh.
I wish we got opportunities like that, but no, it was very localized.
Yeah.
It was definitely an exciting time. I think at the time, everyone was kind of ready for a change.
Yes.
And in the very beginning, it was like not so obvious that now it's like obviously Obama won, but like at the time, it wasn't as obvious. So I think people were just kind of ready for a change, and it's kind of a little ironic because I feel like people are ready for that change now, but we unfortunately are going to get the same two candidates. So
Yeah.
either
I
way,
just
you're not
wish
getting
I
any
had
change.
like
I mean, I guess you could get a change theoretically if Trump wins, but we're going to have the same race as last time.
tough
Very
but
different.
call. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll never
Yeah.
forget, I was on a plane I was on a business trip and I was on a plane and I was so like just intrigued by President Obama at the time. He wasn't President Obama, but so intrigued. I remember watching his speech while I was sitting on the plane and I was so moved. I think he moved me to tears if I can remember. Just like sitting there. I'll never forget this image of me just like riveted in the plane listening to him
Yeah,
speak.
he was just such a good
Powerful.
speaker, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
it feels like we're very far away from someone like that right now in terms of speaking
Yeah.
potential.
That's
So,
so true. Oh my gosh. Well,
I think
let's
we're gonna
keep
have to wait for the next round of elections to see that, hopefully.
yes. Oh
So,
man.
I'm kind of staying out of politics because
Same.
I guess my experience is that it's very hard to make any meaningful change, and that's I think you're kind of asking me. I think it probably had some impact of like wanting to be in something where I can feel like I have a more like immediate ability to improve things. So
Yeah. Very cool. And so how did you end up founding Trellis?
yeah, I
Your
mean, I
agency's
always
been
kind of
out
want to.
since 2012, right?
Yeah, I started in 2012. I always wanted to do something on my own, so I was kind of already thinking about like
Mm.
trying to start a business in college, and just like that's kind of the path that I wanted to take. For a lot of reasons. I think, definitely a little bit of inspiration from like the Facebook story, and that kind of like
Yeah.
started when I was younger. So seeing stuff like that, and like it got a little glorified. It's certainly not as easy as I think people realize. But uh
You're
also
still smiling though.
yeah, I mean, try to. There's definitely a lot of ups and downs, but um being in school, I think being in large institutions, especially school for a long period of time, I felt very like frustrated by the amount of bureaucracy and the slowness and the
Yeah.
inefficiencies and things that I was just like these things just don't make sense. I can do something better. And then I did work for a large company for about a year, a little under a year, and I just been exposed to enough. Whether it was in the politics side, some internships, and then after college, just working for other organizations, just seeing the things that they were doing that just to me were not efficient, essentially. And I was like,
Mhm.
well, let me see what I can do on my own. And actually, originally didn't Trellis wasn't my actual original idea. I had an idea to start kind of like a competitor to like Yelp, and
Oh, okay.
like in the reviews, kind of
Yep.
listings, kind of SEO space, but quickly kind of realized that like building a large scale platform is really capital intensive and probably requires like raising capital and like partnering with engineers. Like I was like getting into engineering. So my original background isn't like software engineering. So I was starting to kind of learn, but I
Uh-huh.
wasn't good enough to build something like that on my own. And so then I kind of saw the opportunity to knew that I had experience selling to businesses and just saw an opportunity to help them
Oh,
directly and like with my own kind of like strategies. So that's, I kind of just, it was a very
yeah,
low cost way to get started, and that evolved into Trellis. So
yeah.
Trellis kind of, I think the first 3 to 5 years was kind of just like experimenting and pivoting, and but early on, within the first year, we stumbled upon Magento. So we didn't actually start in e-commerce really. We stumbled upon e-commerce and Magento and kind of realized like, hey, this e-commerce thing feels like
Oh,
there's kind of a lot of. So actually, I started more in SEO. That was where I had the most
the
knowledge.
WordPress sites, I'm guessing.
Yeah, WordPress sites, but just SEO in general.
Yep.
And we still do WordPress, and WordPress is easy, so we
Yeah.
gravitated towards WordPress. But then from an SEO perspective, we're like, well, it makes like a lot of companies just didn't have e-commerce, and so your retailer,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, you know what, the easiest way to improve your SEO is get your catalog online, because now we have 3,000 products we can index, and that applies also to B2B. So very
Yes.
early on, we were working. We saw the opportunity with Magento, kind of played around with dozens of platforms, and really liked the kind of potential of Magento, and then started to double down on that. And then we saw kind of how far behind like distributors and manufacturers were, and Magento was a good fit for a lot of those companies because of its like flexibility. So kind
Yeah,
of
the consumer.
slowly moved into B2B commerce. We still do a lot of B2C, So that's still a big part of our business, but we saw how like the B2B side was so neglected, and there's just not a lot of knowledge, and there's still a lot of not like there's
Right.
still everyone's kind of learning and figuring out on the fly that I think there's just not a clear path for a lot of these companies with B2B e-commerce, but they know they kind of have to do it, so they're
Yeah.
trying, but they're not necessarily doing it all that well. So
So true. I think
that's
how prescient that you were able to like, recognize that so early on, the opportunity within B2B at that time. What good timing,
yeah,
truthfully,
I
to
remember like
jump
they
into
laughed at us
B2B.
when we were like, we think you can do like at least 1 million online, and they like people would think that was like crazy in B2B e-commerce in like 2012 and 13.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, even still so many of them think it's crazy, Isaiah. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
but
now we're seeing people doing 40, 50, hundreds of millions online, obviously billions in
Mhm.
the case of like Amazon and whatnot on the B2B side, but we're seeing smaller mid-market companies now scale into the pretty significant millions online. So
Yeah, well, because the order value for B2B is so much higher, like, the
exactly.
opportunity for you to it's incredible. Well, that's so interesting. So, I also think that it's so cool that you're involved in so many different companies right now, like, so many cool e-commerce initiatives. Lavar, you know
Yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
mean, that was
yeah,
kind of just opportunistic. They
yeah,
were actually a former customer of ours, so we built a relationship with
uh-huh,
them, and then he was building their company and looking
yeah.
for early investors. I'm not like a big time investor or anything like that, so he had also been pretty early on at Klaviyo, and so
Oh,
um,
cool.
I just kind of took
Yeah,
a bet on them because of obviously, if they could even get 1/100th of what Klaviyo's done, then it's probably a pretty good investment. So, and I also just like that they were kind of tackling 3D modeling,
such
augmented
a problem
reality,
in
that
B2B.
kind of
Mhm.
yeah. I actually think that there's a bigger opportunity in B2B than B2C for them of just like
Yes,
manufacturing, getting like the schematics and the complexity of products and having like
absolutely.
a more digitized version of that. But they were bringing it at like kind of a bottom up model. A lot of the companies in that space and still in that space are really expensive. Like the minimum SaaS fees and just the way to get up and running is so expensive. But with them, they were making it pretty affordable.
Yeah,
So
that's so cool. I mean, I just think, like, the opportunity for equipment manufacturers is huge
for sure,
with be able to have that 3D modeling. I mean, wouldn't it be so cool if you had an e-commerce experience where you could visually see the plant, for example, and see the system and be able to drill down as you're
for sure.
navigating?
Yeah,
That
almost
would
like
be
a
cool.
higher level schematic, and then you can kind of drill down into the individual parts and
Exactly, and
pieces.
see
We're
the
doing
inside of the system and all the parts that go into it and just be able to click, "Oh, I need this, I need"
we're doing
um,
some stuff like that, but I
mhm.
think the problem is once again we get caught up sometimes in the basics, and it's hard to get companies to even do the basic stuff. So that's like, in my opinion, probably like a phase three, right, for some of these companies, and they can't even get past phase one or two. Um,
Oh,
and
I think you're
so,
hitting the nail on the head with the phased approach and how important it is, especially in
yeah,
B2B, to take that crawl, walk, run approach. A lot of times these clients who are just starting out with e-commerce, I see they wanna eat the whole elephant and they see,
yeah,
like, another site that's,
yeah. They're
like,
like, look
in
at
the maturity
Granger. They're
model, it's
like,
like,
we could do
"Oh,
what, yeah, we could do like what Granger does, or like, and I'm like, yeah, but they've been working on it for like
yeah."
20 years. I mean, they've invested millions. Like, I think the first site,
Mhm.
I know someone who worked on like the first Granger B2B site. It was like an $8 million
Yeah.
project in like 2007, right? And it's like, since then, they've probably spent hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And it's like, you're
Yeah,
underestimating the evolution of these things and the investment that have gone into some of these things. And it's just like, I think also
absolutely.
the problem is that things like Shopify and the platforms have kind of commoditized the idea of these things, and then
Yes.
you have this
Yep.
like endless amount of people that are like willing to say they can do it for cheap. And when it comes to actually executing on all these things, the reality is just a lot harder than what
So
people think.
true.
Yeah.
And the business constraints in B2B that you have to
Yeah.
think about, the business rules, the shipping rules, the pricing
Yeah.
rules, all
No,
of that, the
pricing is a
integration,
whole major issue we run into. Yeah.
big deal, especially yeah, I mean, man, there's so much we can talk about, Isaiah.
And they often don't want to change, right? And so that's one of the biggest problems that we encounter with B2B is that they want to digitize their existing processes, but their existing
Yes.
processes
Or
are
yeah.
often very difficult to digitize
Mhm.
because the systems they have weren't designed for real-time pricing calls, for instance, is a good example, where a lot
God.
of the distributors and manufacturers we work with have, basically crazy pricing per customer, right? Or whatever.
Yes.
And
So not scalable.
I know this is getting, I know you told me not to get too technical, but I'll give you the very specific, I see this all the time. And I had an RFP. They're like, we need it done in 2 months. And I'm looking and I know the ERP. I know what they're asking. I know it's literally impossible because I've done it 10 times with that ERP. And they're like, well, someone else said they could do it in 3 months. So I'm like, all right, good luck. Like I'll check in, a year when it's failed. Right. And so, um, the,
Yeah.
the, the, specifically the problem we see with pricing is that the ERP APIs and just the processes are not designed to be milliseconds for that.
Mhm.
So, and the data is so complex, you have kind of two problems. You either need to sync all that data into like the pricing of the ecom platform, which is rarely works well because the e-commerce price lists are going to be not structured the way that the ERP is. So trying to like, and these are, you're talking like, okay, 100,000
Yep.
records times 100,000 company, like you can end up with this massive data integration problem that's not very scalable. So the other
Yeah.
solution to that is to do these real-time calls where you're not storing the pricing data, you're just kind of doing a lookup,
Brilliant. Mhm.
right? So it's just, and we do this, but it's not as simple as people think because the price calls on the ERPs might be 3 seconds. So if you can imagine trying to do like a category page with 30 products and each product maybe has 10 variants, all like the math just is, it's like, oh, well, why does it take 10 seconds to load the page? Or because you need to be loading the page in 2 or 3 seconds, ideally, and ideally faster. And so they just don't have a handle on the technology slash process. There's ways to solve that, right? You could simplify your pricing processes. There's a million different ways that I could go about solving it, but I find that companies are unwilling to have conversations. Maybe it's not, I don't know if they're unwilling or just often we struggle to talk to the people that have the power to even make those decisions,
Yep. The
and we just
gatekeeper.
don't get those conversations, and they're just like hitting a brick wall trying to solve these problems, not realizing that like maybe the solution is to change the way they do pricing, or there are some
I think that's
complex, there are some advanced technology ways that we can solve that, but they usually don't want to pay for that. I can tell
yeah.
you multiple times I've quoted the solution, technology solution for that, where once again, I know you're not wanting me to get too technical, but we can build kind of like a custom caching layer, or there's some
Uh-huh.
iPaaS solutions. There's ways to solve that, but like when you actually go through the process of like the cost of in implementing that, it can be like hundreds or thousands of hours and be
Just not even
pretty big cost for just
feasible.
that piece. And then they're like, oh, well, someone else said they can do it for cheaper. And I'm like, okay.
Man. I mean, I
I know
think
I'm
there's
getting like deep into the weeds, but the point is like this is
no.
just one example of one little piece of the problem that we encounter. And it's like, well, if you can't even solve that, how are you going to get to adoption?
Oh my gosh, you're so right. Which I think just really indicates how much need there is for education
Yeah.
within these B2B companies on e-commerce, because you have these legacy companies that are so used to selling a traditional way.
Yeah.
And it's so different than retail because you have this new e-commerce way of selling, which is so completely different, and they're butting heads with each other, and they don't understand e-commerce. You've got these boomers that are, running these companies that have they're afraid of technology. There's a lot of fear,
Yeah.
and they know what they've built, and a lot of these, especially manufacturing, they're so risk averse, very conservative.
Yeah.
And so, like, I've had these
But
conversations
it's
about, I
funny
can't
because
tell you how
they're
many times I've had,
they're
yeah.
conservative, but at the same time, I often see them. I think they make two wrong decisions that I see, because if
Mm,
truly being conservative, you have to take some risk, because if you take no risk, you're going to
yeah.
become obsolete and die, right? So you have
Yep.
to become a little bit more modern over time, right? And
Yeah.
I think that they make two mistakes. One, they don't give themselves enough timeline and budget to truly do this correctly. And
Mm,
so they try and
that's a
do it
good
cheap.
point.
They think, oh, by doing it cheaper, it's less risky, but it's actually more risky, because by going with the
Yeah.
cheaper, less experienced company, or they go with the thing that's less likely to actually solve the problem
Oh,
and potentially waste money that way. And then on the flip side, they're just doing nothing, I think, is also just risky, because um, you're essentially just slowly losing sales over time to the companies that are doing this well, and there are many of them. Unfortunately, to me, what's scary to me is many of them are large companies. And what's scary to me is like, are we all going to end up working for Grainger and Amazon? And who's going to be left, like, in the small, medium business world? Because those are the guys that are building all the automations and the efficiencies, and no one's gonna be able to compete with that.
I think that's my biggest, like, that is, I am such a huge advocate for small mid-market companies in
Yeah,
manufacturing. I mean, the way that they serve communities. My dad owned a
yeah.
manufacturing company, and to think about these companies falling behind when they add so much
We're all getting
stuff.
sold to private equity because there's no one to
Oh,
take there's no one to
sorry.
take on the next generation, right? A lot of
Yeah,
times the next generation's either not qualified or capable or doesn't want to run it, and
yep.
then they get rolled into private equity, and then private equity, what are they going to do? They're going to sell it to eventually to the other big guys, and you're just going to have
It's
this
gonna be a
massive
big roll up.
yeah,
Oh,
this
I
massive
know.
consolidation, which is kind of scary to think about. And that's part of what kind of keeps us motivated, is like, how can we help these 50, 100 person, 200 person companies compete with, 1,000 person, or 10,000 person or 100,
Yeah.
enterprise organization,
I mean, and I love your thoughts on that. To me, I think it's like really understanding what they do really, really well and niching down as much as possible so they
Yeah.
can dominate that specific product category, whatever the case may be, rather than trying to do and be everything like those big
I,
guys are.
I think
What do you
B2B
think?
e-commerce can be kind of distilled down into a few simple, I think people kind of think about it the wrong way.
Mhm.
And I would actually distill it down as like, what can I automate on the lower end? Like, what are my smaller orders that, like,
Yes.
basically should just be like pretty much
Mhm.
e-commerce? Maybe I have list price or tiered pricing, and maybe
Yes.
that's like everything below $1,000 order. Like, should
Mhm.
we really have a sales rep on that? Or maybe the sales rep checks in on the account, but they're not necessarily
Amen.
processing those orders, right? You're probably losing money from like a time perspective on some of these orders, right? I'm
Mhm.
sure if you broke down the math with some of these companies, like on a distributor with low margins, they're probably losing money on certain orders, right? Just from like a processing standpoint. And they make it up on the bigger orders, right? So it's like, I think you really should be thinking about, okay, how do you automate that piece? And that's kind
Yeah.
of more your traditional e-commerce or traditional B2B commerce. And then I would probably think about, okay, how can I create maybe a more sophisticated quoting functionality through like Magenta or Adobe Commerce's quoting tool is getting pretty robust. I think
Mhm.
BigCommerce is making strides there. There's a lot of, I think, more options there. So like the mid orders, how do I make, that a more quoting process that maybe becomes automated through e-commerce? Because once they accept the quote through the e-commerce platform, they can purchase it online. And then potentially, like, how do we get those people to kind of rebuy or,
Yeah.
buy again? And then I think it's fine to just say, look, our very large customers we're going to handhold, right? And maybe those
Mhm.
are the ones that you don't focus on digitizing up front, or you digitize them for like tracking their orders, or like it's like a portal for them, but they're still getting like that white glove service. I don't think B2B companies are thinking about like the tiers of their customers enough, and
Right.
they're kind of treating everyone as like these manually processes, when it's like, really, there's a big difference between people making small orders, medium orders, and very large orders.
I
And
love that.
yeah,
Tier your customers. It's
yeah,
it's like Operation Elevate the sales rep is the
yeah,
way I like to think about it. Like let the e-commerce store handle those small repeat orders that
yeah,
are so common in
yeah.
manufacturing. Let e-commerce be your sales
Parts,
admin.
parts, and
Yes.
like that kind of
Let your
stuff.
reps
Yeah,
handle the complex orders and
yeah,
still be there for the relationship. Those people that are repeat
yeah.
ordering through the store, they can still get a touch from the rep, you know? It doesn't negate the need for them to have that personal connection with their sales rep. It's just less, a hybrid approach, I think, can really work well. I love that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know we wanted to talk about adoption, so I think that's how I would think about adoption, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I do think that B2B commerce adoption is ultimately the hardest problem, and I think you need to kind of work
Mhm.
backwards from there. I think people get too caught up on like the features, and it's like just having the
Mm.
features alone isn't going to drive adoption.
So
You know,
true. Oh my gosh. So when do you think that sales adoption conversation should be happening in the life
I
cycle of the e-commerce
I think
journey?
immediately before they even start selecting the platform,
Yeah.
before, I mean, I think it's the first conversations that should be had. And I think the conversation should be had around that kind of idea, right? Is like, hey, maybe we can restructure our pricing so that,
Mhm.
people spending less than, I don't know, $10,000 a year, they just get list price plus whatever. They get a automated, e-commerce price that we can do in the ecom platform. And we don't have to do this complicated, like real-time ERP lookup. And you
Yeah.
can kind of like think backwards and actually simplify the technology by thinking about what are the levels of adoption you're trying to achieve, and then how does the technology support that, versus like
Love that.
I see people just being like, here's this list of features we need because that's how our processes work. But they're not really thinking about like, how are we actually going to get adoption at these different like levels? Because getting a getting like a franchise, I'll give you an example, like getting like a mid-market franchised, let's say you're a restaurant manufacturer slash supplier, right?
Yeah.
And you sell restaurant supplies to, um, adoption of a one-off company, I think should be fairly easy to do with e-commerce, right? So you should be able to, they have one location, you set them up online, they can call in or whatever. You can still give them support and stuff, but they maybe just get like kind of like a basic kind of like B2B tiered price, right? That's how I would handle it most likely. And that
Yeah.
way, you just get everyone signed up for this simple program and whatever they need. And you can kind of digitize that fairly simply, and they have one location, right? You know where it's getting shipped. Where it
Yeah.
starts to get a lot more complicated is like the mid-market, or even obviously the enterprise is a whole different level. Like I said, maybe the enterprise McDonald's you handle at a more white glove level, but the mid-market, 50 location franchise, now you need company accounts, and each franchise owner or whatever might need to have their own kind of login and approval like, so now the
Mm.
digitization of that becomes much more complicated with B2B commerce. And so like
Yeah.
you need to be having these adoption conversations around like, what are the types of buyers and what do they actually need? And like,
Mm.
can we realistically build the technology for all of that? Or maybe just start with like the mom and pops or something, and like start with a one location, you know, customers,
That
and just
is
like get that adoption first, perfect that. Don't even try and get the mid market guys yet. 'Cause I think,
yeah.
like you said, everyone tries to do it all at once. They're like, we need all these
Yeah.
features. And then they don't really get any adoption because it's a lot harder than they think to get people to use the website.
I
Yeah.
love this idea of tiering your customers and really being thoughtful about that up front to say,
Yeah.
okay, these are the specific bucket of customers that we want to move to e-commerce to start, right?
Yeah.
That really reduces the overwhelm and the complexity. And I think
Yeah.
that's really cool.
I
Really
think if
cool.
CFOs actually got serious about looking at the data, they'd probably realize that a lot of those customers are not very profitable when you factor in the time costs of, inside sales reps, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
whatever it is. The margin on the order is probably pretty low, shipping costs, and they might be better off forcing them, saying you have to order online. That is the only way, but like,
Mm.
you might actually you might actually be more profitable doing that. I don't know the math for every business, right? But like, there are simple mathematical ways to look at this, right? The cost of an order from time and all of this, right? And then if we can automate it through e-commerce, how much faster can we make it? There's still time with an order in e-commerce. So that's the other thing. It's like, it's
Yeah.
not like just because it's e-commerce, there's zero time. What's the difference? But you also have other
Well,
aspects of the
you have to
data.
think about
Yeah.
the operational efficiencies
Yeah.
too of moving it to e-commerce. Like, I mean, I've worked with these manufacturers where just to get a shipping quote, it has to go through like 5 people just to find out how how much it's
Yeah.
gonna and it takes days.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of time that now, like, if you can integrate with the, Shipper HQ or whatever, you can get instant LTL quotes right there.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
that time
Yeah.
savings multiplies that in a way that
Yeah.
is so incredible that that saves so much time for the business. And you just think about, like, how many more sales the reps can make with e-commerce than
Exactly.
without it.
But I think there's
Like,
kind of like a multiplier effect to all of this. And this is why, to me,
yeah.
like, it's so obvious that this should be the number one kind of focus of the business is, you get if you do all this stuff well, you get a marketing benefit from just having better product data, better website,
Yes.
which is going to be the easiest way to market your business, either on social, like, even if you're marketing on social media, where you're driving to, you want to drive them to the website, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's the central place where you want your customers to go. Yeah, some people might going to pick up locations or stores and things like that. But even the website can help with that. You can do buy online, pick up in
Exactly.
store. A lot. We're doing a lot of buy online, pick up in store, honestly. And so,
Even if you have distribution partners, to
yeah,
have your product catalog digitized for them is
yeah,
huge,
exactly.
you know?
So you have that aspect. I think there's a huge marketing value that almost pays for
Mhm,
itself. Then you have the operational time saving, cost saving, and
mhm.
then the ability to scale sales reps, significantly higher. And then you also have a massive data side to this. So the big thing that I think these companies really underestimate is they're losing the data game to Home Depot and these big guys that are building massive
Customer
amounts of customer
data.
data. And if
Yeah,
your only data is just like basic data in ERP, you are not competitive. Like you need much more sophisticated e-commerce, how the customer come in, what channels, the pixel tracking,
right.
the business intelligence level data that e-commerce provides that you can't get through the traditional kind of
Oh my
sales
gosh, you're
model.
so right about that in terms of attribution and conversions too. It's
Yeah.
just such a clear pathway with e-commerce. It's amazing to be able
Yeah.
to see how well you can kind of
You can upsell
measure.
people. Sales reps not going to be able to
Yes.
upsell people 24/7, or a lot of business owners or procurement people might be looking
Mhm.
at their computer at 9 p.m. to see what they need to buy tomorrow and where are they going to go online. Like they're not going to, you know.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a lot of fear, especially from the sales teams about like, is e-commerce gonna take my job? At
Yes,
least that's what I've heard
100%.
historically.
I
What do you
think
what
there's
how
I
do you
think
answer that
I
problem?
think that I have a bit of a theory, which is that there's fear across the entire organization that if they do this, they will be exposed for not being competent at their jobs and get
Oh, interesting.
replaced.
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong, but I have a theory that there's a fear in many
Mhm.
of these organizations that by trying to move this in the way that they should, it's going to be very obvious that they're not the right people to do it.
That's interesting, and I gotta tell you, I've done needs assessments on this. I've talked to sales reps, customers. I've never heard that fear, but it might be just that they're too afraid to say it,
No
right?
one's going to admit that they're
Nobody
not
yeah,
qualified for their job,
exactly. Like, I'm not
right?
sure if the thing I hear predominantly is, "Oh, our customers like to talk to us.
Yeah, of course they're going to say
Customers
that.
like to talk to us."
Yeah.
You know? But
No,
then
they
you
don't. The
actually talk to
customers
the
want to buy
customers, the
things
customers are
quickly.
like, "I like talking to my sales rep, but I also would love to be able to just order
Yeah.
online," you know?
What
So
what manufacturers, distributors, and B2B companies in general need to understand is that no one wants to talk to you. This is not for fun. We're not shopping for retail.
like
This is
gaskets.
not, my wife is like a retail expert in terms of just knows every e-commerce site, knows all the return policies, like spends time browsing for fun. These people at businesses, they're buying things because they need it to run the business, not because they want to enjoy a
Exactly.
conversation. They're busy. They want to do their job and go home. And like, so the more you can make that efficient for them,
Yeah.
the happier they're going to be, right? No one wants to be in
Yeah.
a call for fun. Like if I could make money doing nothing, a lot of people would, most people would take that.
Oh,
Or,
yeah.
you know,
My friend Chris Harrington is, you might have met her. She, is a CEO of a e-commerce company, and she said it so beautifully on a show once. She said, "Nobody wants to call to talk about the status of their O-ring." Like, nobody nobody wants to know
exactly.
this
Like
stuff, you know?
no one, they just want to be able to find that information as
Yeah.
fast and as easily as possible. And the reality
Yeah.
is technology in most cases can offer that. And a lot of
Yeah.
times I hear two either, oh, they want to talk to us, which I think is generally not true, or
Mhm.
unless they really need consulting. Like the
And there
only
is a need for that in
for
B2B.
sure, for sure.
You know,
But if
there
you're
is
not
always
offering high-end consulting, then they like that's not really that much of a value add. So you need to be kind of a consultant in that perspective of like which fastener do I need for this
yeah.
complicated project? Or and a lot of that can be done through like forms and kind of guided faceted like I'm doing
Selection.
this and you
Mhm.
kind of you see that nowadays with like almost like quiz functionality of like what is the
Yeah.
thing and it guides you to what you need. But the other thing that I hear is, oh, we can't do that, or that technology is impossible. At this point
Yeah.
I would say pretty much everything is technically feasible. That is an objection there, and it's more just a time and money thing, and it's a question of how you're going to come up with the time and money, really.
Yeah, and I think, like, platforms like BigCommerce have made a lot of strides in terms
For
of
sure,
democratizing access for these smaller companies to be
for
able to
sure.
get some of this and more advanced customizable features like
Yeah,
the B2B bundle.
I think you're going to
People-
see a massive wave of both Shopify and BigCommerce. I think BigCommerce is probably a little ahead in the sense that they're like
Mhm.
very intentionally focused on B2B and have been for a while.
Yeah.
And they're going to be making a lot of strides there. But
Mhm.
Shopify is making strides on B2B as well. And I think between the two of those platforms, the cost of doing B2B commerce is already dramatically lower and going to continue to go dramatically lower for smaller and large. I mean, large companies obviously, but also smaller companies that maybe I think at this point probably can't afford Magento, or
I
if they
have a question about that.
if they think they can, they probably are being misled.
I have a question about Magento. How do you think Magento plays into this, like the future? Because I know Adobe's really trying to move enterprise, right?
Yeah, I hate to
And
say it, but I think the reality is it's an enterprise play. I think when you factor in the upgrades, the cost of upkeep,
yeah.
plus, I mean, do you really want to do B2B commerce on on Magento and then have to because on open source you don't have B2B accounts or any of the B2B functionality. So yeah,
Mhm.
you could buy some extensions, but then you have to kind of manage this kind of amalgamation of things, and it gets
Maintenance,
kind of messy.
the
Or you
regression.
buy Adobe Commerce, which is fairly expensive to implement, and the costs are just, I mean, generally are. I like to just be transparent because I think it's better for people to just know what
Yes.
their real costs are. Generally, like all in costs for the license in our projects probably start at 200,000 for Adobe Commerce. That includes the license. We can probably get up and run. There are some like bare bones use cases where maybe we can do it for less, and maybe there's a way that we can get up for less. But I think a general starting point is like if you're not willing to invest 200,000 plus,
Yep.
you know,
Wow.
call it a
That's it.
quarter million to be, round up to an easy number to think about, then you probably should be looking elsewhere. That's
Yeah,
just
and then you have to think about the long-term maintenance,
that's
right?
the big
Because
thing,
that's the
right?
difference in
Is
open
even if
source
you
and
get up and
SaaS.
running, a
Mhm.
lot of times people they find these cheap options, and then they realize when it comes to all the things they actually want to do, it just
Mhm.
adds up, right? Or they fall way behind in the upgrades. And we just had a customer that had to spend a ridiculous amount of money on upgrades because they hadn't upgraded in like 4 years. And it's
Oh,
like almost like a rebuild at that point. And they had like so many modules, and so it's like, yeah, you can what's the word? You kind of delay technical debt, right? They're building technical debt without realizing it, and so we try and avoid that if we don't think they can afford that. You know,
yeah, that's a really good point too, the technical debt part of it. I mean, and this is something that I think just going back to like educating these buyers early on and getting like sales adoption, educating them on the long-term costs
yeah,
of these different options is so important.
yeah.
Well,
Well, that's why digital transformation for these B2B companies, and I hate that word because it's so general, but really, like, I would argue it's, upgrading, modernizing your ERP, probably
yeah.
your ecom platform, maybe CRM if they need CRM or have that separately. And there's maybe a few other, maybe PIM. There's like maybe 5 or 6 systems and maybe an integration tool in the middle. But if you like try and really modernize and optimize all of that, for a lot of these companies, it's probably in the millions of dollars to do it well,
You're not kidding.
across all the different areas that they need, and actually get
Mm.
adoption and get it working correctly for their use case.
It
You
just
know,
makes me think about all these small companies, Isaiah. Like,
where are they?
how are they gonna
How are they going to
how
do
are
this?
they gonna compete?
I think
How are they gonna invest that amount of money
I think you
when
have to start in small chunks.
Mhm.
One, I think I actually would say a good place to start is probably the ERP. I think a lot of
Yeah.
these companies neglect the ERP side, or they're running on these things that are so archaic. They they either need to modernize the ERP or figure out how to not use the ERP very much. But the problem is for a B2B company, it's hard
That's like
not
a
to.
source of truth, you know?
Exactly. So unfortunately, I think you have to start by going probably to I know there's a lot of talk about how the cloud isn't ready for some of these ERPs, but I do think that you probably have to figure out how to get to the cloud on the ERP, whether it's something like Acumatica, NetSuite,
Mhm.
Sage Intact, Microsoft Dynamics 365. I mean, all these things are pretty much cloud ready. I know like some of them aren't in for Cloud Suite. Some of them aren't as good as others in terms of like they're like in the cloud, but they're not like fully baked yet, kind of thing. But
Mhm.
I think ultimately you kind of have to make that switch at some point and start there,
Mm.
because that's where a lot
Good
of the
advice.
APIs and the data is. And if you're on these like legacy systems that aren't can't support it,
This
you're
is gonna
just
be more expensive.
everything's gonna be
Yeah.
harder to do. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so you need to
So
start
good.
preparing for an ERP upgrade. And I think that, like you said, it's kind of scary to think about how all these companies are like operating on these like legacy, like how long can they continue to operate on these legacy ERPs competitively, I guess.
Mm, that's a good point.
I don't think anyone has the exact answer. All I could say is the ERP people are probably very happy and busy. I know a lot of them, they seem to all have a lot of work. So
Oh, man. Well,
yeah.
let's talk about sales adoption strategies that you've seen really work well. Like, what have you seen be super successful for companies
Yeah.
that you've seen adopt this? And what have you seen just, like, completely, like, bomb and fail, aside from
Well,
doing nothing?
I think the build it and they will come is the thing that bombs and fails. And
Yes.
not I think the thing that seems to work the best is having some sort of mix of like fairly modern digital marketing tactics, even
Mhm.
if it's like a little bit more B2B ified or kind of like
Yeah.
not completely, modern, combined with the sales reps really adopting the website. So I'd say there's kind of like three things. So getting the sales reps really on board with using the tool, trained up,
Training them.
having
Mhm.
incentives. Some companies will do like higher commission. I think it was Justin King. I don't know if you know him, but there's a
I
few guys.
don't know something. Yeah.
He's been doing this forever, and I think it was him or someone like him, um, that they're like, if you just commission, okay, any order that goes to their website, we'll give you 10% commission. Regular commission's 8%. I'm just making that up. All of a sudden, adoption to the website went 100%, right?
Right?
And yeah, they game the system, they place orders on behalf of the customers, but you're forcing a behavior and a cultural change within the company
Exactly.
that gets you to where you want. And maybe you do that for a year or 2 years until it just becomes the norm, and then everything just resets on the new commission. So there needs to be an incentive structure that really incentivizes the sales reps to want to get their customers or help their customers adopt the website. And
Yeah.
then I think that creating, a fair bit of automation around the smaller customers is pretty important, where it's
Mm.
basically self-serve for smaller orders, or they can pretty easily log in, get their pricing, tiered
Yeah.
pricing, or maybe they can even have an automation through sign up. Although I know like
Yeah.
people
Mm.
often like to have kind of approval processes on sign up, but like we talked about, those kind of smaller orders, almost treating that more like the adoption should be organic around it being just such an easy tool to use for
Yes.
smaller orders, and then the sales reps incentives, and then some sort of kind of overarching digital marketing plan around
Mhm.
SEO, Google
Email
Ads,
marketing.
email
Mhm.
marketing. We're actually trying to experiment with direct mail,
Oh, interesting.
and doing a campaign with combined between email, SMS, and direct mail, all targeted at the same accounts.
Ooh.
So theoretically, like imagine, okay, you have 10,000 customers, only 1,000 are using the website. Those 9,000 are not. We're going to send you a direct mail, $100 off your first online order. We're going to send you an email with the exact same coupon code. We're going to, maybe it's SMS, we're going
Yeah.
to send you, we know who these people are. We know where they are.
Right.
They're your customers, right? And so why not mail them? Why not? And then
Yeah.
ideally also couple that with the sales reps. The sales
Yes.
reps are also giving them that offer. And so collectively they're getting hit in all these different directions as to why they should sign up and use the website.
Ooh, I like
Um,
that.
so we're still in the early stages of kind of doing that for various customers. But once again, it's like, it's hard to it's hard to get these companies to do this stuff.
It is so hard.
If I
I
was the
can
CEO
tell
of these
you.
companies, I would have a lot more progress for you to
Even just,
talk
like,
about.
operationalizing the sales adoption plan, like, I'll give you an example. I have
Yeah,
a client now, we're, like, knee deep in it trying to get them sales adoption plan. We've got to create, like, little video clips for the reps on how to,
yeah,
set up the accounts and how to assign roles so they know how to do it and create it. Like, there's a lot of internal marketing
yes,
needs to happen in addition to training the internal team and having a rollout. Like, we're going
yeah.
to have a
These
meeting
rollout
where we're going to roll
plans
this out, and this is
can
the
take
incentive program. And then here's,
months and maybe even
yeah,
years in some cases to like truly go throughout the
yeah.
organization and really, yeah. I mean, it's
Especially if
just,
it's an
yeah,
enterprise level company, you know?
yeah,
But it's worth it, right, Isaiah?
yeah.
It's worth it because
Well, it's 100% worth it, and I
yeah,
think in just as much as it's worth it, I think it's absolutely necessary to stay alive. Like, how much longer can your
exactly.
business model be call me and hopefully we'll answer and
Amen.
email you back, and there's just a time limit to that business model being your primary sales channel,
You
right?
have to
And
think about
so,
how quickly and
yeah,
rapid the pace of change is and how
yeah,
much faster it is
yeah,
for people to make purchases and the expectations of buyers. Like B2B buyers are B2C buyers and they're used to one-click order from
for sure.
Amazon.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you have to meet them there
Yeah,
if
the
you wanna
other big
survive.
thing that I'll say is, that I didn't touch on, and, I'm doing a live webinar with, are you familiar with Trade Centric, or formerly Punch Out to Go? Um,
No, I'm writing
yeah,
it down though.
check them out.
Mhm.
A lot of B2B commerce goes through e-procurement, right, or EDI,
Yep.
right? And so a
Mhm.
lot of the pushback that you'll also get is, well, if I buy on the website, then I still have to manually enter the
Mm.
orders into
Mhm.
my
Yep.
system to like recognize the inventory or whatever. And that's another example of technology objection that has been solved. There are companies like TradeCentric that you can hire that have software where they will connect their e-procurement, so like let's say Coupa, to your Magento website. And so now theoretically you could have everyone order through Magento and it'll now integrate into their Coupa system or wherever they need to integrate to. So they only have to do it one time and it's back into their internal systems. So there are multiple
No
different ways.
manual entry.
They could do it through, they could order also through the Coupa system and it'll trigger to the ERP or e-commerce as well. But ideally, I think you want to be training your customers to use the e-commerce platform, because if they're doing it through e-procurement, they're only going to be buying the exact things they need, and you're never going to be able to do any merchandising or upselling or collect that data on the e-commerce level. So if I was a
Um,
business, I would be trying to get them to adopt the website and integrate backwards into their system so they don't have to do the manual entry, but that way
that's
they're getting
interesting.
the email marketing from the e-commerce website, all the things that are hopefully going to help them upsell. Um,
Mm. I have a question for you about just like this whole kind of like ecosystem of integrations, right? Like this ideal scenario, obviously a lot of these manufacturers, they're not even close to being there yet, but like wouldn't it be this amazing scenario where literally you reduce any manual part of the process, everything gets automated all the way to the point where it just gets
See,
shipped
once
from a
again,
drop.
all this has mostly been solved theoretically.
Yeah.
There's many good integration platform as a service tools.
Yeah.
So which is a long acronym. It's called iPaaS.
Uh-huh.
And so there's the software, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. There's software for connecting all your software, right? So most people are familiar with like Zapier. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with
Yeah. Yeah.
Zapier?
Yeah.
So at a more B2B kind of enterprise level, there are dozens of these tools. Like the one that we work with the most is Celigo,
Okay.
Celigo.
Mhm.
And so that's a place where I would also start is, okay, what are some of the most common processes we do? Let's implement a Celigo for those processes and hook up the. It doesn't have to be Celigo, right? You maybe want to evaluate which of these is the best for your systems or use case, or but
Mhm.
theoretically you can have one system in the middle. It's a software that you can log into. You don't have to be a developer. You can see all the integrations, what's failed, what's gone
Mm.
correctly. There's a lot of this can be set up without even a developer, but some of it does potentially require development. A lot of it's like business systems analyst kind of work where it's like
Okay.
sort of technical, but you can get a lot done without being like writing custom JavaScript. Um, so theoretically, you can have this thing in the middle connect, your 5 or 10 major systems. So going back to that original digital transformation thing, that's a key component, I think, for most of these companies to be thinking about
Yeah.
in terms of architecture. Um,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I had this great conversation with Alec Berkeley, who's at BigCommerce. Do you know Alec? Have you met Alec
I
before?
probably have.
Yeah,
I
you
know a
probably
lot of
have.
people there.
He founded Bundle B2B, which I guess was
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
that sounds familiar. I think I have talked to him. Yeah.
yeah. He
And is
came
he
up
now working on the B2B edition side? Like he's
yeah,
now, yeah,
yeah,
because it's pretty
yeah.
much all like B2B edition now, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I was tasking him, I was like, "What about the future of e-commerce? Like, what are you seeing?" And it was just fascinating, this vision that he explained of, like, this network, almost like an ecosystem, like you mentioned the iPaaS, right, within your own company, but this ecosystem with all of your suppliers where everything is all like 'cause I work in these manufacturing companies where they've gotta call the vendor to see what lead times and all of that stuff, but wouldn't it be cool if you had this whole ecosystem where everyone was kind of on the same network and it would all just automate, like getting quotes from vendors,
I mean,
suppliers,
that's kind of
everything.
what Trade-Centric is solving, right? So
Cool.
Trade-Centric solving that. Some of these iPaaS solutions would allow you to do some of that maybe on more of a custom one-off basis.
Yeah.
So I think there's a mix of solutions you can use to essentially do that. And some of these e-procurement things I think help with that. I'm not so deep in the weeds on them, but I definitely think we're moving in that
Getting
direction.
there.
The technology is getting closer and closer to the point where it's like less custom development and more like configuration of these tools.
Yeah. What do you think about the role of the sales rep in B2B e-commerce, like in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that they're going to have to move. I think that they're going to have to restructure sales to be focused on two kinds of things.
Mhm.
And it's most organizations are sort of set up this way, but I think they need to be a lot smarter about it. Either new business slash consultative, like you have, I guess you have three things. So let me rephrase that. You have
Yeah.
three kind of major things: new business and selling them on the company. And why should I be like, this is why you should buy from us, right? And that's where a sales rep is valuable because they can explain the company, the
Yep.
value prop, and all the things. But once they've already been sold, it moves into more account management. So I think the sales rep function needs to live in three kind of areas: more of an account management function, meaning upselling, looking at the data as it moves more e-commerce. Hey, I saw you bought this, but did you know we have this? And analyzing the purchasing behavior and understanding their business, and becoming kind of a kind of consultant, an ongoing consultant for that client. Then you have the new business aspect, which is obviously what a lot of sales is doing. And then I think you have kind of the like sales engineering, sales consulting for like large projects in
Yeah.
which they may have like very complicated needs and you need to kind of like quote out and devise kind of like a pretty complicated bespoke solution. So
Yeah.
personally, I think if you're not going out and getting new business and getting them to sign up for the website and adopt the digital tools, or doing some sort of ongoing account management where let's say you have a book of business and you're growing that book of business using the
Mhm.
digital tools ideally because that will help you automate and
Yeah.
handle a
And
larger
it's
book
a
of
source
business.
of leads for them,
Yeah.
truthfully. I mean, we
Yeah,
see that
exactly.
with e-commerce, these low e-commerce leads now turn into
Yeah,
more
oh,
of
this
your
guy bought
contract
like this one
leads.
thing, but oh, holy, maybe it's
Yeah.
actually part of a big company, but they bought this one thing, they needed it, they found you guys. But if you actually
Yes.
talk to them, you could upsell them. So there's that upsell account management component. And then I think you're going to get
Oh.
those kind of like RFP level sales
Mhm.
rep functionality that's never going to go away. If someone needs $1 million project and you're a supplier for that,
Yeah.
there's going to be, and that's where it's a little bit harder to digitize that piece. That might be more of that like request a quote functionality, or like the what's the word, the requisitions list. It's basically the
Yeah.
B2B wish lists. These
Mhm.
B2B wish lists functionality might be useful for those like large kind of custom quoting projects, and you could even build it on their behalf or help them build it. And then like, hey, is this what you need for this upcoming $1 million project? Let's get
Yeah.
it. It's all on the website. Like, let's look through it because you're probably gonna want to double check it like 5 times with them, and then theoretically they could even still place it as a purchase order through the website.
Yeah, I love everything. So it's not that the sales rep is becoming a dinosaur or going away. It's just that they're evolving
Yeah,
into different roles. And I love that you mentioned that there's the sales engineer role, which is that really subject matter expert who's going to help with those really complex orders. You got the account manager, sales rep who's just making sure to nurture and build the
yeah.
accounts that are coming in through the online store, right? Like, and there was one more you mentioned. What was it, Isaiah?
I
Was
would call it the account
new
executive role, which
the
is just like
the
new
new
business,
customers.
handling new
Mhm.
business. I would say there's
Yeah.
there's an additional role that's common in business. I'm sure you've heard of it, like the BDR, business development
Yes.
rep. I
Uh-huh.
actually think that's more of a marketing function,
Yep.
and that needs to go into conjunction. We're actually doing that now. We're like, if you just send these cold emails, they usually go into the void. No one really wants to answer them. It's a very inefficient, not very profitable business model to cold call and send cold emails. But if you
Say
put a
that
whole
again for the
yeah,
people in the back.
yeah, I mean, just cold outreach is difficult. It's not impossible, but I think it's generally very difficult to make highly profitable. So what we've
Yeah.
seen be successful is doing it around an event or around a webinar or something
Yeah.
like this. Or I do outreach to B2B commerce executives for our podcast, get on our podcast. And now
Mhm.
I'm reaching out to them with something that's a little more interesting than just, hey, come talk to me because we're another vendor that maybe you want to work with.
Yeah.
So we're doing private events, private dinners. Um,
Which
occasionally we'll just do cold outreach, but we look at it more as like they see me on LinkedIn or they see my email, and it's hopefully thoughtful enough that maybe they see us in many different ways, and it's just another touch point. But expecting
yeah.
people to just respond and buy through cold outreach by itself, I think is by becoming more and more obsolete.
I think you've painted this really amazing picture of what like a really modern manufacturing company could look like
Yeah.
by having these 3 different sales roles, but also really, really strong alignment with marketing, right?
Yes.
No silos, marketing
Yeah.
working hand in hand to support and provide air cover for any sales efforts that
Yeah,
are
there's
happening.
actually a really smart B2B SaaS kind of marketing guy, like thought leader. I'm
Mhm.
blanking on his name. You know how you see so many people and it's hard to remember everyone's name, but and he talks a lot about this, but he focuses mostly on the SaaS industry. But I'd say the SaaS industry is actually much further ahead than manufacturing and distributors, but they're really not that different. If you think about SaaS, they're doing B2B sales. It's just they've automated a lot of it. But they have account
Yeah.
executives, they have account managers, they have BDRs, they
Mhm.
have sales engineers, and they're trying to get the big enterprise deals that are custom, but they're also trying to automate some of the smaller
Yes,
deals.
you're right.
And he talks about how most of the cold calling outreach and even some of the marketing tactics they use, when you actually break down the math, are highly unprofitable, and the things that do work are more like kind of long form content marketing,
Yeah.
podcasts, building your personal brand.
Mhm.
Um, and when you break down the math and you look at how people actually find you, it's often a series of touch points around those different things. And then they're like, oh, I saw Isaiah on podcast. I saw him on hopefully this
Yeah, yeah.
this live B2B commerce sales adoption event, right? Or they saw, and then they
Mhm.
maybe got, they see us multiple different ways, and then they reach out, and then the attribution software will say, oh, it was SEO because they Googled, but it's like it wasn't really SEO. It
Yeah,
was like they saw us 5 different ways.
combination.
And that's
Yep.
where I think BDR ties into that, because maybe they did see the email, and as long as it's not too annoying, I think it can have a positive impact. But it's not the only thing that might lead them to. I've had
Yeah.
multiple BDR outreaches I've done myself. I still do a little bit. I'm trying to build up BDR. We don't have a strong BDR function, and so I'm trying to kind of like figure it out myself, because I don't like hiring someone that's like, what are they going to do if I can't, like, they're not going to know what to do and it's not going to work. Um, and multiple of the responses that I've gotten in the meetings I've gotten are people that have already seen me on LinkedIn, but I didn't know who they were. They showed up in Apollo, which is like an outreach, and
Yeah,
they had responded because they'd already kind of knew who
'cause
we
you
were.
built your personal brand. Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, I can say the same thing. I can't like how
Yeah.
many, clients we've gotten because, they've seen what I've written on LinkedIn or the
Yeah.
case, it and it may not be the only reason, but it's a really big part
Exactly. Yeah.
of why they
And in
decide.
those cases,
Yeah.
multiple of them weren't ready to buy right now, but I was at least having
Right.
like meaningful conversations, and we need to like do our newsletter, and they'll see that, and hopefully we'll be in touch with them over the course of the year, because our buying cycle is pretty long.
Mhm.
People aren't changing agencies or replatforming that often,
Yeah, but you're making a really good point about how sales and marketing is kind of merging. It's like smarketing, and it's gonna
Yes.
become more so in
Yes.
the future, like, podcasting is a huge long-term brand building play, but that can also lead to sales, and I was just seeing
I mean,
something.
if
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, no, I don't mean to cut you off, but like, I guess to summarize, I think if you're saying what's the future of if you're not a consultant, then I think you're going to become an obsolete salesperson, or
Yes.
you're essentially marketing. You're either marketing to generate leads, and you're maybe have a sales function around that, and you're generating leads that you bring to the consultants, or you're a consultant to
Yeah.
help them sell. And if you're not one of those two things, there's
Yeah.
no like hard sell anymore. There's too much information. It's too easy to Google things and find stuff. It,
Which
yeah,
I think really highlights and illustrates how important e-commerce is to that whole equation.
yeah,
Because the days of a sales rep being the order taker, taking the phone calls, placing the orders, that is all something that can now be automated and through
yes,
e-commerce. And so e-commerce is really elevating,
yes.
these sales reps to a higher level to be more consultants or to support on the marketing side. It's kind of like pushing in both either of
Yes.
these
You
directions.
have to be more like a consultant, or you're essentially kind of living it underneath. Maybe you're not called marketing, but you really are marketing,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And companies that start thinking about it that way, I think will be a lot more successful because they won't be lying to themselves, and they'll be calling it they'll be thinking about it in the right way. Um,
So I have to
yeah.
ask you about this. I heard you on a podcast talk about like this is so common in especially manufacturing these family, there's this
Yeah.
family-owned companies. The owners, the original owners are boomers, very not digitally native at all. And the younger generation is, antsy to kind of change things up. And there's kind of like sometimes this rub
Yeah.
that can kind of hold the company back. What do you think needs to happen there for that to change? Like, what are your thoughts on that whole
Well, I think
dynamic?
it's pretty simple. I think the older generation needs to give up control of the areas that they're probably not qualified to do and pass that down to the younger
Mhm.
generation to take control of that. And I think the problem that comes up is that maybe they're scared that the new generation's not going to do a good job, or there's other aspects of the business. So I think that having a good partnership around that, and I think Gary Vaynerchuk is actually a good example of this. He took over
Mm,
his dad's business and digitized it all, and his dad gave him very strong control over the digitization of the business, and he took, a small $4 million, analog business to like a 50, I think they got to like 50 million or 100 million online, or most with a heavily online wine library. Is like, that's how he really got started. And then he started the digital agency. But I think his dad was still involved in the business, running the business, helping with the business, and that's fine. But I think his dad had the humility to say, look, I'm not going to
in
run Google
control now.
ads and build an e-commerce site. You do that. Like, he was very fair about clearly handing that off and not
Yeah.
trying to meddle. And I think I see this meddling and these like, I don't know if it's an ego thing or
I think
a
it was.
control
It's a
thing, and
control and an ego thing.
not wanting to give up control. Um, so it's a psychological thing. Honestly, they need to go to therapy and talk to a therapist. Honestly,
Well,
that's
you can see some why
I'm
why
serious.
they're like that because they
Yeah,
built these companies for
yeah.
decades. They put their blood, sweat,
Well,
and tears in it, you
unfortunately, a
know?
lot of these people, that's their entire identity, and they don't have a identity outside of that.
Oh,
You're talking about, I was a psychology major. I have a pretty deep understanding of psychology. So a lot of people in business in general, that's like their identity,
you're
So you take
right.
that away from them, it's like, what are they? They're just retired, or, you know,
So
semi-retired. They play
cool.
golf. So maybe they should
They've
go to
got
therapy.
daddy issues they've never
They should
resolved.
go to therapy. I don't know.
Love it. Oh my gosh. Well, Isaiah, we could keep talking all day. I have so many more questions for you. Can we do a part two? This is so
Yeah,
fun.
I told you that
Oh
we
my
wouldn't.
gosh.
I think
I
there's
love
a
it.
lot more nuances to adoption, that it's just
Yeah.
hard to fit into it, especially when I'm trying to explain who I am. And, so for people that don't know me, and it's the first one. So absolutely love to do part two. And I think there's a lot more we can maybe get into, like more specifically around marketing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, just to sum up, you said so many great things. Like if you're thinking about e-commerce, you got to start planning and thinking about sales adoption early and get
Yes.
your sales team involved. Tier out your customers as you're trying to figure out how e-commerce is going to work for your company. Tier your customers and figure out which ones e-commerce is going to help solve first. That's so amazing. I love that insight.
Yeah.
And then making sure you're working closely with marketing to just internally market the heck out of e-commerce and make sure your sales team is trained. And I love what you said about incentives, making sure that you have your sales reps are getting commission and a higher commission. I heard that from Ben Rudnick. He mentioned the same thing. He's like,
Yeah.
pay them a higher commission for e-commerce sales. And then that's,
Yeah.
'cause that's how they're
I,
motivated. So
I I
making
know Ben very well, and he's been doing this for forever in distribution. And so,
Mhm.
I mean, it just shows you, like, he's been doing this for so long, and it still feels like we're still kind of in like the early ground floor. Which is why I
Right?
think there's still time to leapfrog and get ahead. But I feel like every year that window is going to continue to get harder and harder to bridge that gap. Although the technology is getting
Mhm.
more modern, it doesn't mean executing on all these things is getting any easier because there's so many things to do. You know?
So right. So the lesson is you got to start now. Manufacturers,
Yeah. Yeah.
now is the
Don't
time.
don't
Don't
do a
delay.
12-month RFP and then
Yeah.
buy in 2025. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm all for like
Reach
taking your
out to
time.
Isaiah at Trellis and have him help transform your company.
Well, we'll do free proposals, free, like,
Yeah.
we're not going to do full free discovery, but we'll do a
Mhm.
significant amount of, obviously we'll try and qualify and make sure we're not just like wasting their time, but we'll help them quite a bit in the sales process. I think people underestimate, like, there's
Yeah.
people out there to at least start getting educated and see what maybe you should consider.
Education.
Yeah.
I think that's such a huge point. There's such a
Yeah.
gap there, Isaiah. Like, even
Yeah.
during the life cycle of the project, I mean, I can talk about that forever. Just these clients who don't understand and they make decisions that they're not fully informed about because they don't
Yeah.
understand it, and they're not
That's
asking the right questions when they should be because they don't wanna look stupid.
a big part of, I think, why, I would say we're kind of like upper mid market pricing. Like our
Uh-huh.
pricing, we have enough of an idea. Like we're not Accenture, right? We're not the most expensive, but
Mhm.
we're definitely above average in terms of cost. And a lot of that is because we have business systems analysts and
Yeah.
very high end project managers and principal and tech lead engineers that are like asking those kind of, there's a lot of communication when someone asks, well, I want this, they might think it's simple feature, but like, okay, well, there's 20 ways we could build that. Like, do you really mean this? Or
Yes.
like you said, you need shipper HQ. Like, oh, we
Yeah.
want like LTL shipping. It's like, well, should you look at shipper HQ? Like now that
Which
opens up this whole like vendor selection process, and there's just a lot more to these nuances than people understand, and that's a lot
which
of what we're
requires a really good business analyst so that you're leading with the business
exactly.
requirements first
Yeah.
before you even think about the technology. That's what
I
comes
personally
next.
think that if you're a B2B company and you're not hiring an agency, like if they don't have a business systems analyst, you're probably going to have a hard time getting the project working. Like that made a big difference once we introduced the business systems analyst role into our
Mm,
projects. I would say like 4 years ago.
okay.
And
This is
our
a silly question. How is that different than a solutions architect?
So we have solutions architect. It's very similar. Our solutions architect
Mhm.
typically starts at the beginning of the project, so they're
Okay.
more like the sales engineer. But the business systems analyst stays with them indefinitely. They're more like a project management. I'd say the way we look at it, they're in between the project manager and the tech lead. So every client
Got it.
we have a simpler kind of Shopify model for like smaller projects where they don't need all that complexity. But
Yeah,
generally, the B2B projects are a level above that, and that consists of a project manager, a business systems analyst, and a tech lead. We have layers
got it.
above that for like escalations and complex stuff. But what we realized with just a project manager and a tech lead is the project manager would try and do some kind of pseudo technical work, but they really didn't have time because they're managing multiple clients and they're trying to manage timelines and priorities and keep everyone busy. And then the tech lead is trying to do development and keep their developers effective and review code. So who's actually looking through shipper HQ documentation and making sure like this is gonna like what are the business requirements and how is the
Yeah.
technology gonna fit the business requirements? And we do a lot of that upfront with the solutions consultant, but like you said, throughout the project things come up. So if we
Yes,
only
there's
have the
always
solutions up front and he stops working on the project, we need that person there
I
forever.
see.
They're always there, even on the post launch and maintenance. So yeah.
That's a huge value add.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah, and a
I
lot
love
of our customers that really get it and stay with us for a long time, they end up having like very like deep relationships with the business systems analysts where it's
Mhm.
like they're like part of the company basically. Yeah.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Like if we
cool.
tell them like we might have to change teams, they're like, no, like we try not to change teams. That's exact for that reason we try and keep the teams on the client into like forever. It's not always that easy, but we
Man.
they don't
Well,
like
you've been doing it so long. 12 years you've been in business.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm sure it's been quite the evolution. My
Yeah, there
god.
are times where sometimes it's starting to feel like a job where like you
Oh,
lose the like startup, like
yeah. I
so
heard that. I heard something with Warren Buffett and what was his name? Bill Gates, they're buddies. And they said something like someone asked for advice on when you're in the startup phase, what advice would you give? And they said, enjoy it because there's nothing like it.
yeah,
There's
eventually it
nothing
becomes a
like,
job.
yeah, isn't that funny? So,
Yeah,
well, you look
trying
like
to
you're having a
reinvent.
lot of fun. So
I think you have to reinvent yourself and kind of try new things, and that's what I'm trying to do.
I
So,
love it. Well, Isaiah, this has been so fun. Well, where can people reach you if they want to get connect
yeah,
with you? How
LinkedIn
can
for
they reach you?
sure. You should be able to find me just typing in my name on LinkedIn or Twitter, are, like the two main things. I've kind
Mhm.
of given up on Instagram and like
Mhm.
it's just too hard for me to manage all the social media. So LinkedIn and Twitter is like my main social media from that perspective. And then if you just go to trellis.co, we're .co,
Mhm.
so the word trellis, Trellis, which is a word
Mhm.
actually, trellis.co. Unfortunately, we're not number one on Google, so you have to scroll down a little bit. We're slow. We have to compete with like Amazon Trellis, so we're getting like slowly higher. But it's .co. I have to make that very clear because a lot of people like still, I was hoping .co would take off more than it has. It has a little bit, but it
You're
was
gonna see more of that now, I think. There's more and
we
more.
are for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like almost impossible to get a one word .com. So it's either .io or .co.
Mhm.
I think those are the two best. .io is like I think more like technology. .co I like just because it's so simple and it's like kind
Yeah.
of like .com, but hopefully
Mm.
.o and .co become kind of normalized so people can own a domain that's not like 7 words and
Or they have to pay like millions of dollars to get a
yeah.
.com.
I mean, I even requested to speak to the Trellis like they won't even respond. Like
Oh.
they're so rich, the Trellis.com owners, like I'd probably have to offer them like $100 million for them to like respond.
I think we
So
went into the wrong, but we should have started a domain company where we
I
just
started
built a
buying
site.
some premium .co's and .ios actually because I think that's a
Did you?
untapped. I think that
Yeah.
future wise, we're talking small money relatively, but some of these that I bought for $1,000, maybe they'll be worth
Yeah.
$50,000 in 10 years.
It's very
So
likely. I think you're not wrong. So
actually, I got a few that I got that were not premium that I think will become premium, like
very
that.
cool.
They're .ios, .io especially. I think you're .io, right?
I am a
Yeah.
.io.
To
Yeah.
be honest, there's a part of me that wishes we did .io, but at the time, we took the bet on .co, and we're not going to
You know
change it
what?
anymore.
You're doing great, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's so much more about your domain. I
It's
mean,
it's more annoying when we deal with like a corporate thing when they're like,
mm.
"Give me your email," and it's like some corporate thing, and then they're like .co, like, "Oh, it didn't work," or they send it to the .com because they're just you know.
I feel you. I feel you. My gosh. Well, cool. Well, thank you again, Isaiah, and thanks everyone for listening. Andrew's here today. He says this is a great conversation. Andrew, thanks for tuning in. And we are so excited about B2B e-commerce and sales adoption. We're going to do a part 2. Isaiah, you and
Uh,
me, we're doing it.
Absolutely,
So,
and I
yeah.
do record this or post this up on like
Yeah.
YouTube. I'll definitely want to promote it, and
Yeah.
a lot of people aren't there for live, right? So they might see it
Exactly.
afterwards. So let's
Yeah.
definitely.
So I'll get you the
But
replay and
I
stay tuned after I turn off the live and we can chat afterwards. So yeah. All right, cool. All right. Thanks everyone. That was like the most awkward ending.